Well, Chris Behrmann, thanks so much for joining us on today's episode. I'm excited for this one. I know you and I have gotten to know each other here in the last, gosh, I guess it's been almost a year at this stage. Um, but for the audience, Chris is a gentleman that I've met by way of purchasing actually this home that I'm sitting in. So thankful to you for that. But also just outside of that, you and your wife have been incredibly generous and helpful to us in terms of getting settled here and just all the stuff that comes with a transaction like that. And Chris has been it's been cool to understand, Chris, what you do, in your consulting business and coaching business. And so I'm eager from my perspective, obviously selfishly, to get some more insight there, but obviously for the audience here to understand what it is that you do and inspire others and coach others and lead them ultimately to be better people, better businesses, and so on and so forth. And so with that said, I'll turn it over to you, Chris, to put that into your own words and take us as far back as you want early in your career, how you started, what you're doing now, and we'll go from there.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I just it's interesting. So I guess part of it really all started in my mid to early 20s, where I got the chance to work at some small startup companies, and I was able to create the mission, vision, values, and really focus on culture building. And so I got a passion for culture inside of corporations. And I've always loved trying to help and make people just improve in life. And I remember one time I heard someone say, take your misery and make it your, just your focus, see the need in the world. And so for me, the misery was there was just a lack of leadership in the workplace. And really, it all boiled down to relationships. And I can share more of my story later, but the biggest thing is really what we're lacking inside of corporate America. And then that actually transcends into our homes as well, as we're just lacking great relationships. We've forgotten how to do that. And so I think really in the big picture, we're all trying to figure out, we want to be a part of a community. We want these deep, authentic relationships, but yet we don't want to step out and be vulnerable to try to create them. We want them just to happen, and we want people to trust us and create that with us first. But it doesn't happen that way. So that's kind of my company. That's what we do, is we focus on building amazing culture, which impacts which impacts employee experience, and then that impacts customer experience, and then it just keeps going, gets stronger and stronger.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that, Chris. And I can, being in sales and working at a company, there's obviously a million threads we could pop off here and start to talk about. But I think one thing that interests me, and maybe this is just given my age and demographic and the fact that I have two young kids, because I can align with younger folks who are just going through school or just coming out of school, getting into the workforce, starting their own company, whatever it is that they're doing today. And I have varying thoughts every day. It seems like of like what is important in life. I'm sitting here at this computer. I'm selling something for a company, technology sales, or I'm building this junk removal company. And like, what does it all mean? We're all just walking this earth, and at some point, things are definitive. Like you're born and you'll die, and there's taxes. Those are like the things that we can always know that they're never going anywhere. And like, what are the things that really? And I think at some point in your 30s, and it probably changes in your 40s, and it'll probably change again in your 50s, depending on who you talk to. I guess my question is like, not necessarily why things change, but like, how do we and I can obviously learn a lot from you in your age bracket now that I'm in my 30s, but like if I were talking to like a 20-year-old through my perspective that I now have, which, if I were 20 and somebody said this to me, I'd be like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But like in that age, I just don't really understand it. But I guess like today when I'm, sitting here at 34, I think, there are certain things in life that matter, but like, how do we communicate that effectively to folks younger than us that haven't gone through the experiences that we have, but they undoubtedly will, so that it hopefully aids them in their current, demographic and age group to have hopefully a life that's more fulfilling, just because they'll figure it out, air quotes, they'll figure it out sooner, thus have more years of a fulfilling life than you, me, and anybody else that took longer to figure it out. It's kind of a weird question, but do you get what I'm going with that?
No, absolutely. I think you're spot on, and that's kind of the point behind the book that I wrote. The You Not Me mindset is what I understood in my kind of probably early 30s, around 33. I went through the real estate crisis, 2007 and 8. Just absolutely, we had a ton of just investments in real estate that, if that had not happened, would have done unbelievably well. And unfortunately, it did. But it was actually the greatest thing that ever happened to me, because when we lost everything financially, and then at the same time, my youngest son, who was 3 at the time, was diagnosed with a retinoblastoma. So we thought that he was going to be blind in one eye eventually, and it just, I remember being in this house that we were trying to sell. My wife wanted to stay home with our kids, and I just remember bawling my eyes out. And I would have done anything to have had what was my son was dealing with, happen to me. And it just hit me, and I just realized what mattered the most, because you can lose everything financially, you can lose everything as far as your material assets, your house, your car, whatever it is. And what I just realized is just relationships are the most important thing that we have. And it doesn't change whether you're 20, whether you're 30, 50, 60, 80, whatever it is.
Mm.
Ultimately, at the end, work is infinite. It will always be there. It'll keep going. But the time with your family and your friends is finite. And
Mm.
if we can just realize that, and realize that every moment, I mean, it's very cliche, every moment is a gift. And every moment, every time that we're standing in front of somebody, the question is, how can we love that person well? How can we make them feel valued, cared for, and really important, so that you actually make them better because they interacted with you? And so I've learned that from the workplace. I've learned it from coaching sports,
Mm.
whether it's youth sports to middle school to high school sports, but even just being parenting. It's one of the greatest. Parenting is one of the greatest training grounds for a person, because it just really helps you see, you reflect on how you treat somebody, but you also see, like my youngest son, for example, he just picked up things by watching me. And
Mm.
sadly, some of those things were not the greatest. Some of those things I wish he didn't see and
Yeah.
wish he didn't emulate. But it gave me the opportunity to slow down, and then to kind of either get down on one knee and either apologize or say, hey, what I did wasn't right. But really, when you look at whatever age group, and really my favorite age group is probably that 18 to 28 or so age group.
Mm.
Not that there's anything wrong with any of the others, but if you can catch people early, which is why I started my high school boys group when I was 30, if you can catch those kids and really reorient their life 5, 10 degrees, instead of ending up way, way out over here at 60 years later, they're so much closer to staying on the path of just an amazing life.
Mm.
One that they don't end up, to your point, we all die. We are all coming to an end, and we don't know when that day is. But the biggest thing is, are we going to have shame and regret? Are we going to say, I wasted it? Or are we going to die with some peace and joy, with people around us that not only do we love, but they love us because we've loved them well, and a life filled just with joy, knowing that your life lives on beyond you because of the impact you had to the people around you. And that's most importantly your family. And that's the greatest impact you're ever going to have, because you're with them. And sadly, we're about to be 5 months away from being empty nesters. My oldest is a sophomore in college. My youngest is a senior in high school. And in 5 months, he leaves to go to college. And so those 20 to 18 years, they're no longer in my house. But I hope that I loved them well. I hope that I pointed them in the right direction, and I showed them what it's like to be, hopefully, a good man, a good husband, and a good father, so that they can then carry on. And thankfully, they're a lot better than me at the same time point in life. And so for me,
Mm.
that's success. For me, that my boys are better than me is awesome.
Yeah. Well, logically speaking, I think when you think about a chronological timeline of family history, like that's what you hope for, right? You hope for your kids to be slightly better. To your point, 5, 10 degree of variation there. Get them a little bit better than you were. Have them coach their kids a little bit better than they were coached, and ultimately creating just better people. So that's all good stuff. So I've got two things here. One, I guess, so you're big on relationships, and I think everybody would agree, at least on a surface level, right? The varying levels of how much folks believe in relationships or not probably varies widely. I'm a huge believer in relationships, especially now that I get older. I think you see the values of relationships as you go through experiences in life, whether that's personal or business. But like, are there things that you can point to, Chris, just in having so many conversations with folks in corporate America or running businesses about, here's where we fail at building great relationships? Are there things that are just common themes that can point to and be like, yeah, we really stink at this. It's because technology's ruined the world, or we just don't put ourselves out there much. Like, what are those things that you run across most of the time?
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting thing is, as we've seen with COVID, we've been dealing with the remote workplace or even the hybrid workplace, and what's been interesting is that most companies have tightened their purse strings, and they said we're only going to spend money on the things that are really important, which is whether it's creating more widgets or at a cheaper cost or selling more or whatever it is. And what they've failed to realize is that the culture is the key to sales. The culture is the key to building more widgets, to people being innovative and creative to figure out a better way to build them or faster way or whatever it is. And so what we found is in these hybrid or remote workplaces, people have become very transactional with calls. There are times that I'll be on, call after call after call after call, and it's literally there's no break. And a lot of times you're saying, hey guys, we're 5 minutes over. I need to run because I'm late to another call. So what happens is everybody gets on, they talk about the agenda, and there's no more of that kind of, if you were in person, you get up, you start walking out of the room, you talk to people, Davis, how are things going with your son in soccer? How, you just moved into a new house. How are you guys doing? You guys settled in, whatever. Like that doesn't happen anymore. And so people, like the relationship gets very shallow and I should say very shallow and very narrow because all we talk about is just the work thing that's right in front of us. And we forget that everybody has lives that are as important, if not, I believe, more important outside of work. And just the impact that we're missing out, because when you look at corporate America, and people are so focused, especially publicly traded companies, right? They're focused on quarterly earnings, yearly earnings, stock price. And so there are a lot of times you can take your eye off the ball and you look at the things that really in the big picture, yes, they matter, but also we forget that our employees really matter. There are a lot of people that say customers are the most important and everything else, but we have internal customers. We have colleagues that if those people don't feel valued, trusted, and cared for and secure, they're not going to perform near as well. Same thing as in sports, right? So if you have a player that goes out and, take whatever sport it is, and they make a mistake, and whether it's basketball, football, soccer, whatever it is, if they make a mistake and the coach pulls them out right away, that player in their mind, all they think about is if I screw up once, and so instead of when they go out and they play free to try and create and do great things, they have this thing on their shoulders where they're stressed about making one single mistake because they don't feel like they're valued and like they're cared for because they can easily be gone in a second. And sometimes we see that with corporate layoffs. There are times that we could do corporate layoffs or right sizings or whatever a lot better than what we do. We can do them in a much more human way, as well as the same thing when you have employees that, if this is your standard, but the employee is here, can you love them and say, hey, we have a standard, but we hired you for a reason. We believe in you and we know you can do this and we're going to help you get to this level. So we want you to get up here because we love you. We brought you on for a reason. And what happens oftentimes is they might give them some stuff to do or a little bit of training, but the person doesn't come up. They're just like, see you gone. Instead of saying, okay, look, we've tried to help you. Is there something going on? Because what I've seen someone that was this close to getting fired, and I went and sat down with the person for 30 minutes and found out that their wife was having severe health issues. They were getting no sleep at night. They were stressed out and everything. That was what was, affecting their performance. And they were about to lose a really great person just because they never took the time to find out what's going on outside of the workplace. And so when someone is struggling and if they aren't getting to that standard, the human thing is saying, do you really want to be here? Do you like this? Or maybe do you need to be in a different role? Is there a different role that would fit you better and keep that person who you hired in the first place in the organization? Because it takes 2.5 times the cost to when you let someone go to rehire somebody to train them again, time lost, all that stuff. And it's like, okay, yes, there are times where you might need to let people go for lack of really drive or willingness to work to get to a level. Yeah. But can you do it in a way that you actually say, but if this isn't the right fit, we'll help you find somewhere else. We will vouch for you. We will write you letters of recommendation. And there, I think we just lost that human side of the workplace.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And what I think what I think is interesting to ponder over, and this is for both sides of the coin, the employer and the employee, and that is the importance of, and this word gets thrown around all the time, but it is the importance of culture. And the employee oftentimes doesn't actually know what draws them to stay with a company or want to leave a company. Most oftentimes they think, oh, it's my pay or the benefits, or I'm not getting promoted, or I wasn't put on this project assignment over Sally Sue that got it. And on the employer side, they think the same thing. They think this person's not performing, they're not worth what we're paying them, and then we got to get moving, on to the next person. I think what gets lost oftentimes is, and you hear it all the time, but you don't really. It's one of these things where, like, back to my previous point, like, you don't really know about anything in life until you experience it. You can talk about it, you can try to visualize it, you can accept words and things and be like, that makes sense, but until you experience it, it's completely different. But like, until you get into a place that has really great culture,
Mm.
and then you go to another place that's got really bad culture or subpar culture, you really don't know like what it looks like as an employee or really as an employer. And I think that's why people stay in jobs or leave jobs. It's, of course, pay is a factor in benefits and everything else and what you're doing, but people stay because of who they're around. And then that's totally to your point. Like, you can't get that with this. Like this is great. You and I will chat for 30 minutes, but we're not going to chat after this, face to face. We're not going to step out in the hallway and catch up, which is super important. And I think people just want to be, you want to have, of course, we've got our friends, that we interact with in our lives and whatnot, but like your work people you're with them for at least 40 hours a week most of the time. You want to have that good relationship with them that spans beyond, but beyond the four walls of the building. So I think, along that vein, like, this was a Twitter thread that I got involved with yesterday, the day before. And people were talking about how you measure culture. And of course it went back to, and it's consolidated. So you can only have like 140 characters or whatever before. And so you lose a lot of context there, but like, the conversation undoubtedly went to data and analytics, and people come in and, there's firms that come in and judge companies, and it's like, oh, you've got great culture or you've got bad culture. And I'm looking at this Twitter thread. I'm like, how does any outside company know if another company's got good or bad culture? Like, isn't that established by the people within it that work within it? So, not to influence your answer here, Chris, but like, my position is that culture is what the people who work at the company say it is. It's
Absolutely.
not, if somebody comes in and says, oh, all right, you guys win the award for greatest company culture of 2024. That's all well and good, I guess. But like, I want to know what the employees say, unbiased, unswayed. Like, what do you think the culture is? And I think culture takes a lot of different forms. It could be, oh, I'm so happy they're lenient on my PTO and vacation, or I just
Right.
love the fact that, I've got a great friend group there. Like, we go out to lunch every Wednesday, and it's a great time, and so on and so forth. So, long-winded way of asking this question, Chris. But what is culture for you in your eyes?
Yeah. So it's interesting because I actually created a relational index that kind of establishes not just internal culture, but also what the customer really sees and feels. Because what I believe is culture is it's like the old saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast, right?
Mhm.
And it's so important, and it's truly a feeling. It's kind of like the wind, right? When you're running in a direction, and if the wind's behind you, you can't feel it because you're running with it. But if you turn around and you start running into the wind, you feel it, right? So it's weird because culture is one of the things you can't see, but you feel it. And these corporations that come in and measure without taking the time to really their due diligence, speaking to many employees, because you can do surveys and sometimes people, they're worried, are they really anonymous? Am I going to get in trouble? And so sometimes things can be biased, but a great culture is one where people feel valued and cared for, right? They feel they understand what their purpose is, not just their function, but overarching, what does their role do to make that company not only move forward and grow, but ultimately, how do they impact the customer? Because a lot of times there are people that are behind the scenes that never impact or meet with the customer, and they
Yeah.
can feel lost sometimes. They can easily feel like a cog in the wheel, and they're like, what, this isn't fun. Like, what am I really doing here with my life? And just to your point, just sitting behind a computer, there are times that you can forget the impact you're making. And so it's making sure that as a corporation, especially leadership, that you reach down to your employees and you remind them what their purpose is and the value that they bring, but also just the value of who they are as a person. So when that is all done well, culture goes really well. But also too, you have to make sure another part of culture isn't, there are times where companies don't want to pay their employees and more money's coming in, but they don't want to share that. And the point is people see that. And then they start to kind of say like, do they really care about me? And or is it just that they're happy to pay me a little bit, but they don't take the time to really kind of come down and see individual levels what's happening. And so I really feel like when you get the culture right, your employees feel it, and
Mm.
and then your customers feel it because the greatest thing I saw these data points where companies that reach a level of excellence in their customers' eyes, they have 5 times faster revenue growth. Customers are 4.5 more times willing to pay a premium for their services, and they
Mm.
have 2.7 times improved operating margins because there's less fires to put out. Because instead of when your employees are not dialed in and engaged, they're going to make mistakes because they don't care. They're just clocking in, clocking out. They're not going to go above and beyond. So what happens? Things fall apart. And if you don't take the time to really care about your people, they're not going to want to take care of you. So that's where a lot of people, in the past, people would be with a company for 30 years and they would retire there. That's a rarity these days. And a lot of times people say it's because, well, the company's not loyal to me. And the thing is culture can work both ways. And the problem is with the relationship, it's just like walking down the street. There are tons of people when I'm walking in the grocery store, they're just looking down, or they might even look at me and then they just look away. But I always make it a point to look them in the eye and either smile or say hello, how are you doing? And what's amazing is they actually respond back. And oftentimes they respond back with, hey, how are you? And a smile or whatever. And even though we don't sit and chat for 10 minutes, it took me to step out and engage them. So somebody has to do it, whether it's the employee saying, you know what, I'm going to make the company culture better. And it starts with me and all the people that I interact with. I'm going to make them better. I'm going to have a grassroots way of making this culture better. But also, when you have the top down doing it as well, and everybody meets and creates this amazing thing, that's when culture really takes off, and it's kind of like rocket fuel for a company.
Yeah. It's weird you say that because I definitely experience it out in public too. Like I'm the guy that like I don't know, maybe it's because I'm like behind a computer all day and the interactions that I have are this. And so if I go to the grocery store, I'm like, man, I'm chatting with somebody. I'm making it a point to just verbally hear myself say something to some live human instead of a virtual thing here. So I totally get that. It's almost like you catch them off guard. Like, oh crap, like someone's speaking to me. Like, yeah, we're humans. We're supposed to do this, live. And so I like that. And back to a previous point, I think salespeople in a lot of organizations, especially the ones I've been involved in, salespeople are compensated very well, usually, and I certainly was, and still am. And but what's so frustrating is like you get a sense of commitment to a company, especially if you like most of the people you work with, and you start to go, at least I did in my sales role, you start to go beyond like, let me just see how much I can sell, to let me see how I can help the company improve, so that maybe down the line we end up selling a lot more. And so I went through like 5-6 years with this company of like, I felt like every single day I was raising my hand, professionally, politely, because I trust people. And I'm like, I think we got to do this differently. And I, outline why I think so, or hey, if you just made this tweak, like, do you understand the ramifications positively for doing that? And I got to a point where like, because the company didn't take a responsibility to improve in any of those areas, it's like it gets exhausting. And
Yeah.
you just stop as an employee. Like you stop. Like I still like the people that I worked with, but I wasn't showing up every day. I mean, I'm a worker. I've always had a good work ethic, but positively say that subconsciously I was not all there like I was for the previous 5 to 6 years, simply because it didn't seem like anything was changing. Um, and there's a lot to be said there, but I think that from the top down on the company side, you have a responsibility to listen, and not just listen like when employees reach out because they have this idea, but you should be more proactive in giving employees a voice and a forum to get their ideas out there. It's not to say that as the employer, you need to execute and do take in all the suggestions that people give and like, oh yeah, we're gonna do that, that, and that. Like you still have to be calculated, but like you have to give people a voice. And I think that's what, ultimately builds great culture and keeps people hanging around because they feel like they're making a difference. So um, I wanted to get into kind of some more, you know, tactical things from the employer side, Chris. What, like talking about just that a little bit more, giving employees more of a voice, or reaching out, making yourself available to build those relationships, like from the, call it C-suite level or right below it, SVPs and VPs, like how often and in what ways should they be communicating from the top down to their employees in this remote and hybrid workforce model that we've seen? Like, should they be putting out videos? Should they be requiring, employees to come back to the office more? Like, what have you seen as like most effective in that regard?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's somebody that I've worked with in the past that he basically inherited 270 new people because this company had let somebody go, and he came back from a vacation, and they're like, "Oh, by the way, you have this new group reporting to you," and and I love this guy's heart. It was awesome. He said. And this is what I've told a lot of people, that it's really so easy. It's just a matter of being intentional and scheduling it. He said that he met with every single one of those 270 people individually. And so he just knocked it out little by little. And he spent like 10, 15 minutes just having a one-to-one conversation with them. And it took a couple of months, but man, like those people love him. And it's so simple. I don't know, there's an old cartoon where there's this person looking down the beach, and they see this person kind of leaning over and standing up and leaning over and standing up. And as you get closer, you see that there are all these crabs that have washed ashore on the beach. And he's picking up and throwing them, one by one into the ocean. The guy's like, "What are you doing? There's so many. You can't possibly impact every one of them." And the guy said, "Well, you know what? This one, I made their life better. I saved their life." And he keeps going one by one. And I think that's the thing. It's whether, you take people that report to you and making sure that they're reaching out to people, and then whether it's a CEO or whoever, making sure you're taking the time to have somebody reach out and just have a human conversation. I know somebody that works in Ukraine. He was a colleague, and there's a lot going on in Ukraine right now. He's in Kiev, and he's still working in the midst of all of this and crushing it, like doing an amazing job. And I just reached out to him on Teams, and I said, "Hey, do you have a minute to catch up?" He said, "Sure." And so we got on this call, and the first thing he starts doing is talking about the customer we have in common. And I said, "No, no, no, no." I said, "Hold on. How are you? How is your family? What, and again, this person is absolutely doing an amazing job, has
Yeah.
so much going on around him, and was so focused to like talk about work because that's the norm, right? When people reach out, a lot of times if they're above you or whatever, or even of a different role, like you think I need to answer to the work that I'm doing." And
Mm.
he just sat back for a bit and was like, "Oh, oh," and then we had this great conversation about, restaurants and what's going on with food there, and his son's about to go off to university soon, and just all these different things. And it was an amazing conversation. And it took 15 minutes, 20
Yeah.
minutes.
Yeah.
And the more, again, you can't do it with everybody right away, but over time, or you can have somebody else reach out to make sure that person knows that they're valued and cared for. Because I do a lot with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, and they have something called Command College, where they bring in leadership from all different law enforcement agencies, like whether it's FBI, sheriff, highway patrol, et cetera, from all over the Southeast. And that's one of the things I talk to them about is, no matter how high you go, you can't forget that you need to reach down and touch those lives. And it doesn't have to be every single person in a 1 week span to where your calendar is completely blocked, but little by little. And then also word spreads like, "Hey, so-and-so reached out to me. It was awesome. It was so great. He talked
Yeah.
about my family. He talked about all this." And then the hope is those other people are expectant and hoping to get the same phone call because
Mm.
they know that they care. And so it's making sure you're finding a way to do that. But also, I do think that there is some beauty in working from home and giving people the ability to do that and flexibility. But I do think and really feel that if you don't have at least somewhat of a hybrid culture, you lose that cultural relational piece. Because I mean, they've even seen that in with engagement is that when people aren't fully engaged, there's like it's like a 36% are you're actively engaged. Like those are your rock stars that show up. Like I love Junk Raider, right? Junk Raider is my favorite place to work, right? And those are the
Yeah.
people you love to have work for you. And those are the ones that they just need a little bit of encouragement, and they will run and run and run for you. They're awesome. And then you have like 16%. Those are the actively disengaged ones, the ones that show up that they're negative. All they do is point out things that are wrong. They do halfway work. They're constantly pointing out it's other people's fault. And those are the ones that you need to spend time with, but also you need to make sure that they don't, and like a cancer, infect the rest of your people. But because then you also have like another about 50% of people that are so pseudo engaged,
Mhm.
and they show up, they do their job, they clock out, but they're not truly bought in. And if someone comes to offer them 10% more, they're like, sure,
Yeah.
why not? And so the thing is if we don't take care of our people really well and make sure they feel valued and cared for and let them know their purpose and how much they mean, you're going to lose your best people. And it doesn't take much, because the people that are really producing a lot for you, it just takes a little bit. Like, and they're also the ones that'll burn out because they put so much heart into it. Kind of like you said, for years and years, you keep trying to change it. And if they see nothing is happening and they're never told, hey, we really appreciate you, when their health starts to falter, or their family relationship, because they come home stressed, and so that impacts their families, they're the ones that say, why am I continuing to do this for 5 or 6 years now? They don't obviously care about me.
Yeah.
I'll go take my talent somewhere else. And that's the worst thing you can have happen, is lose your best people.
Yeah, for sure. And I think just a quick piggyback there, and I didn't understand this early in my career, but in that we do our work behind a computer most often, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was pick up the phone, and or if there's a scheduled call and it's a video call, like don't be the guy that's not on camera,
Yep.
right? Because this is way more valuable than just hearing the voice. So for anybody listening in the audience, that's one of my best pieces of advice, and it's a very basic thing. And to your point, I was at a sales kickoff, and they had brought in a speaker who was like ex-military. He was flew airplanes through, like, I forget what they called it, but low level, like over
Mm.
mounted, like very low to the ground, was not high up. Great guy, like made his way through the ranks, so on and so forth. And his whole speech was centered around like how an organization can be, can align very well with tactics from a military perspective. And he's got this PowerPoint up, and he's just talking about different missions that his team had to go on and how you move and cover together, right? You never just send two people out and nobody's covering the other, and that's kind of how it's in an organization. But then the common theme rose in that it was like these people care about each other more than just like we're work colleagues or we're here because we all have to be. But the only way they got to that point where like I really care about Chris is because I spent, a year of training with Chris, and like in close proximity. We went through stuff together. And not to say that like business is the same as armed forces, but like you have to take kind of the same concept there and like really get to know people. Like we're not, this isn't life and death selling junk removal services or business coaching, right? But it's if you approach it that way, I think if more people approach it that way, I think we'll see more businesses thriving, which will ultimately make our world a better place economically, not to mention the relationships that are sprouting there that would hopefully, at a human level, make everything better as well. But Chris, my last question for you, if and not to put you on the spot if you haven't thought of this before, but like any mentors come to mind that you've had in the past that you're like, this guy or gal was just instrumental in my development, whether that was personally or professionally, and maybe why or why not?
Yeah. So two I'll bring up. One was my very first job out of college. Um, I remember the when I worked with Pfizer Pharmaceuticals right out of school. I was just had a pharmaceutical sales job, and this guy named Brad Bailey. He actually would ride in the field with us every so often, and I just remember seeing him. When we were leaving an office, he always would say to the person, "Is there anything I can do for you?" And and that was kind of how he closed everything. and
Mm.
and left every interaction. And my dad was an amazing salesperson, would give anybody the shirt off his back. And I just saw the way that kind of both of them cared about people, to where just the interaction was so genuine, and so others, focused. And that's part of how I came up with the whole "you not me" mindset, is just about, instead of looking inwardly what I can get, but looking outwardly what I can give. And so the second person was a guy by the name of Bill Greer. During that whole financial crisis, he was big into real estate, and somebody kind of pointed me to him as someone just to chat through just what was going on, how best to handle all these things. After the very first time I met with him, and just sitting there for about 30 minutes, just kind of throwing up on him everything that had happened and everything that had gone wrong and all the stuff that I did wrong, he said, "Hold on a second, Chris." He said, "I want to ask you a question." He said, "Have you forgiven yourself yet?" And I just stopped, and I just kind of looked around, and I was like, had never even occurred to me to even think about that.
Yeah.
And it just was so interesting, because I was carrying this huge weight and burden of what I had done to my family with all these decisions. And, granted, the real estate crisis, I mean, there's a lot of reasons that happened. And it wasn't because, I mean, all the things that we had bought, we were paying for. So we had nothing to do with the things falling apart. But nonetheless, it was something that I had control over, is how was I going to handle it now, and how would I walk forward. And when he told me about, when he asked me if I had forgiven myself, I hadn't. And so when I went through the process of walking through and understanding what I had done, but also learning from it and knowing that I was going to go in a different direction, I think that's one of the worst things we can do, is have shame and regret for things that we've done in the past that have really hurt us, and not releasing that. And just like we want to forgive other people, and other people want to be forgiven when they make mistakes, we need
Hmm.
to forgive ourselves as well.
Yeah.
And that was such a freeing moment for me to realize that, for me to walk forward and really to run forward, I needed to forgive myself and realize, yes, I made a mistake. Yes, we're not in a great place, but I now have a new path and a new plan forward to go
Yeah.
in a better direction, and for the long term, a much wiser direction. To
Totally.
hopefully never do that again. But
That's awesome. And probably a whole nother podcast episode on how to effectively do that. We could probably schedule that one. But no, Chris, this has been great. As always, it's a pleasure to chat with you, and I appreciate you coming on. I know you have a newly released book that you graciously gave me a copy of last night that I told you I'm going to dive into and report back to you on. But for those that want to maybe get a copy of that, or reach out to you for advice, for business coaching or anything, what's the best way for them to contact you?
yeah, so the book can be purchased on Amazon. So it's just the "You Not Me" mindset on Amazon. And then just you can email me at chris@younotme.com, and happily get back and help any way that I can. And that's a sincere offer, just to help anybody that really is struggling, trying to figure out which way they want to go. Because I think one of the hardest things is, right now, a lot of the 20 somethings think that they have to have everything figured out already. And it's not true. Like, it's okay.
Right.
The biggest thing is that you're trying to make yourself better every day and move in a better direction, and eventually things will fall into place. But don't stress and be anxious about where you are. Good things are to come if you're continuing to learn and grow.
That's good stuff, and we'll be sure to link everything in the show notes. But Chris, thank you again for joining. For the audience, hopefully you guys got something out of this. I know I did, and Chris, I'm sure we'll be chatting soon. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Thanks, Davis. Take care.